FullTiltPoker.net presents Learn from the Pros.
We continue to learn from the pros, presented by FullTiltPoker.net. Today we are talking about playing with the big stack. How you doing down there? How you doing over there? We continue with our roundtable discussion where we pick the brains of all the greatest pros. It's not a literal thing, Howard Lederer. Don't worry, you're safe.
Okay, good.
You're okay. I don't know if you're safe today because your sister is here maybe to tell some great stories about you because you got a great book coming out, right? It's out.
It's out, yeah. My autobiography. You can find it in stores everywhere.
Nice. Howard, you scared about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to buy all the copies.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some great pictures
It's a tell-all expose.
There's some great pictures of it, of him as a little boy, like pulling my hair out.
Oh, great.
Yeah, torturing me.
Yeah, let's safely move on from that one. Ted Forrest, I've called a lot of your tournaments on Fox Sports Net. It's good to see you in person and not just inside the TV screen.
It's good to be here, Chris.
Thanks for joining us. Erik Seidel, he has 7 bracelets to his name and the King of Pop. Why you want me to call you that? You just wanted a nickname, so that's it now? Okay, sold. We'll take it. David
That's what
Gray.
his kids have been calling him for years. Pop.
Nice. How are you, David?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
Good to see you. Playing with the big stack, guys, is there just one rule of thumb? I mean, help me out here.
In my experience, I have a fairly easy time amassing a big stack, and I have some trouble protecting a big stack. So I think when you get a big stack, it's important to still kind of attack the blinds and the players that you know won't fight back. But at the same time, when you do have a big stack, it's important to protect it.
Well, what's your trouble? I don't want to turn this into a therapy session or anything, but what do you think?
In the past, I may have been too willing to engage in race situations. Like if I have a pretty good read on a guy that he's got like ace-king, and I've got the 2 10s or 2 9s, you know, with dead money out there, mathematically, I'm probably supposed to call. But as a big stack, having easy opportunities to pick up blinds and smaller pots, maybe I should be actually less willing to engage for a third or a half of my stack, you know, in a race situation.
I thought you had to be aggressive all the time.
Well, not all the time, because, I mean, one of the things that I find the biggest mistake that I think players make when they have a big stack is that they take it upon themselves to knock out all the short stacks. And it's actually a better strategy to let the short stacks butt up against themselves. I mean, obviously, if you have a great hand, then it makes a lot of sense. But your chips are so much more valuable to the short stack than their chips are to you. They're not going to increase your stack by very much, whereas you're going to double up their stack. It's much more valuable to them to get doubled up. So I think people will take a lot of really weak hands thinking, it's not a big percentage of my stack, so it's not a big deal, I'll try to knock this guy out. And I think that that's a huge mistake, and you can really lose a lot of chips just deciding that you're going to be the one who knocks out every single short stack at the table because you've got so many big chips. It's not your job.
David, do you have to have a certain personality to be a bully?
Not really, but it helps to let people not think you're bullying them while you are bullying them.
What does that mean?
Well, you can actually...
The Dan Harrington special.
It's true. When Dan Harrington won the World Series the first time, he turned his hand over about 3 times in the whole tournament. He just would bet and look like he's Dan, and people would go out. And a lot of times he had good hands, and a lot of times he had garbage. But people were afraid to mess with him, so he got out of people's ways. They broke each other. Then he'd make big moves on them. People didn't want to go broke to Dan, so they would fold. He would pick up chips and pick up chips. And then once in a while he would have a good hand, and if he ever got called and the guy was all in, he won most of those. But he was a thing of beauty in that tournament by being super aggressive without really ever having anything and knowing when to back off. And just his table presence and his reputation as Action Dan, which means he gives no action. He was giving tons of action, but no one ever challenged him because they thought that's Action Dan. So if you have a really tight image, you don't have to be that tight. You just have to not get caught too often.
Yeah, I mean,
David Gray's image is like Action Dan Jr., by the way.
I mean, I would have to say that one of the few times that I'm willing to show a card out of my hand, which I almost never do, is when I have a really huge stack and I'm raising a lot of hands at the table. When people start to comment on that, you know, it looks like they're getting frustrated and they're going to come after me, I'll be like, look, you know, then I'll turn over the look, I had kings or whatever, so that they'll sort of back off that idea and they'll think that I'm just on a card rush.
How do you get kings?
Well,
I like turn over 1 king. See,
well, no,
I had a high
or
card.
an ace. Like if I raise on the button, for example, which you raise a lot, and I happen to have an ace, and they're like, it looks like they're getting frustrated and they fold. Sometimes I'll show just the ace.
The half a peek.
The half a peek. And it's not something I normally do because I like people to pay to see my cards. But in that situation system where you can wield your big stack well, if people start getting frustrated, sometimes it's good to throw off a tight image so that the short stacks aren't moving in on you and putting you to decisions for large percentages of your stack that they normally wouldn't.
I mean, I've definitely, I remember last year at the World Series, I was in a situation where I think it was Barry thought he had busted me in a tournament. But it turned out I had about like 2 or 4 chips left. And there were 2 other people, and Barry was the big stack. And for like the next 2 rounds, while I was anting, just trying to find a little spot to survive, he just tortured the other 2 guys, because I was so short that he knew they could not afford to get knocked out before I got knocked out. They had to wait for me. And he picked up about 2 rounds worth of blinds before I went broke and finished fourth in that tournament, because he knew that they couldn't gamble. So situations do come up where you can wield the power of the big stack.
Well, I think the one thing that people don't understand is how easily you can lose your big stack. You can be at a final table. You can be the big stack, and you can be the next person out. It's very easy. You get involved in a couple of hands, double people up, and all of a sudden you're gone, and everybody's wondering what happened to that guy.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I've seen
kind of like
so
I
many
mentioned.
times, right.
It's more important to protect your big stack once you get a big stack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so many times where people there's sort of 2 sides of the mistake. One is they raise with a really weak hand when someone in the big blind is basically pot committed, because they're just like, I have a big stack, I'm supposed to raise, and all of a sudden they lose some chunk of their chips because they didn't look at what the size of the stack was in the big blind. Or the reverse is that, you know, they'll be in the big blind and someone will move in the field and they'll have a really weak hand, but they'll look and they'll say, well, you know, it's only 20% of my stack and I can knock this guy out if I call. And all of a sudden, somehow they've gotten 20% of their stack in with, you know, like Queen 10. And you're like, how on earth did that happen? And that's because they're thinking, well, you know, I have Queen High, it might be the best hand, and I'm not going to lose all my chips, it's only going to be 20%, and it's a huge error.
Well, guys, of course, the goal of this discussion is to first obtain a big stack and then use all the information, which we appreciate very much. Thank you.
To learn, chat, and play with the pros, go where they live. FullTiltPoker.com.